Tämä jakso on englanniksi. Welcome to the podcast of Human Alchemy. Today we have a special guest, as in all of the episodes so far, but special in the sense that we're doing this podcast episode in English. And we want to introduce you Glyn Faulkner, who is chaos magician and a coach. Welcome to the podcast, Glyn. We're happy to have you here.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So, Glyn, we invited you here to discuss magic. So, what is magic? How do you understand magic?
Oh, well, start with the small questions. So, I don't know if I have a clear definition of what magic is. I mean, you can Google and find 100 different definitions. You've got the classic Aleister Crowley of causing change in accordance with one's will. Then you have one I like is the Alan Chapman, the English magician, describes it as the art, science, and culture of experiencing truth, which I love because it's completely true and it's also utterly useless. That you can't really do much with the definition, but it's very poetic. But I don't know if I have a personal definition of what magic is myself. I think of it kind of like love, that it's really hard to explain, but I know it when I see it.
So, how does magic look like or feel like in your experience?
I guess most people have had an experience like the phone rings and you know who's calling even before you pick up even before you look at the screen, or you see. Actually, this has happened with you, Kipina. That I remember in Helsinki one time, I saw the word Kipina like 2 or 3 times in quick succession. I was like, Kipina wants to talk to me, and I think I can't remember whether I called you or you called me, but it turned out I was right. And sometimes, I guess that's synchronicity would be a more specific term for that, but it's like when something happens and you know that has meaning and significance, then sometimes you just know things will work, or that you know things are caused by things that they're not, that where you can't see a clear chain of causation in the material world.
So what I gather from this explanation is this sense of interconnectedness of things. Yeah,
that's a much more fluent way of putting it than I managed.
Okay, so you're a chaos magician.
Yes.
What does that mean? Can you explain that?
Okay, so chaos magic originated in the 1970s in the UK, same as me. So it's the original idea behind it was that you had a group of magicians who were generally unemployed, didn't have a lot of money, and they were looking at the materials that were available for rituals and magical practices from Victorian times, from the Aleister Crowleys and the Golden Dawn folks, Dion Fortune, the kinds of magic they were doing, and they were looking at these things. And it's like, we need a golden goblet, and we need like this dagger from the Middle East, and we need the robes, and it's like, and the expensive incense. How much of this do we really need? And so they started stripping away the... Am I allowed to swear?
Yes.
They started stripping away the bullshit, basically, and took an experimental approach to it. So if I use my Moomin mug instead of the golden goblet, does the ritual still work? Yes, it does. Okay, so what if I use a knife from my kitchen instead of the ceremonial crease knife that I'm supposed to be using? It's like, okay, it still works. So they got the more they stripped away, the more they were like, okay, well, let's, how far can we take this? So, for example, this is a ritual to Apollo. What if I drop Superman in instead? Remove Apollo and put Superman in, because they both fly, and yeah, it still works. I mean, does it work as well? Not necessarily, but so they were trying to get to what was at the core of magic. What was the least you have to do to for the magic to work, and that appeals to me. I generally I've often joked that laziness is one of my superpowers. That if you give me something that's overly complicated, I'll find the minimum I can do in order to get it done. And so that approach to magic resonates for me.
Okay, so is the magic actually in intention, not in the things?
It's a good question. I think there's a very slim book by, I mentioned Alan Chapman before, and I really like his work, his writing on it. That there's a book called, I think it's called The Camel Rides Again. It's only like 60 pages, but he goes into what is fundamental to magic, how, when you've stripped everything away, what's left. And he points out that to a chaos magician, the important thing that you have to have is an altered state of consciousness. But to a voodoo practitioner, for example, that's completely optional. But you need a connection to the person that you're doing magic on. So the classic being, hair or toenail clippings, some kind of magical connection to the person. But you don't need the altered state of consciousness. But the chaos magician will tell you, no, I can completely curse someone without their toenail clippings. But I need the altered state, what chaos magicians would call gnosis, like the altered state of consciousness. And so it's not really clear to me what the fundamental required thing is. I mean, there's always intention. I think you're definitely on the right track, but there's intention doesn't seem to be enough on its own. That you can, someone cuts you up in traffic and you can intend bad things for them, and they don't happen. So yeah, I don't know what the minimum subset of required things is. Intention is clearly one, but there seem to be multiple paths to magical results that all work.
That's really interesting. So, how long have you been on this road? How did you become acquainted with magic?
It was thanks to one of my friends at school when I was a teenager. I was 11 or 12, and my best friend, I think at some point his someone had given him a Dennis Wheatley book. I think he's not that well known anymore, Dennis Wheatley, but he has a very Christian, judgmental take on magic. He's his books have titles like The Devil and His Works. And my friend and school friend Andrew had developed an interest in magic and the occult from that, and had by the time I knew him when we were 11, had several books on the subject. And so yeah, I became interested in magic as a teenager, and I think it's quite an edgy teenage rebellion thing to do. I think quite a lot of people start that way, and that carried on into my 20s, but I never really found a magical path that felt exactly right for me. So by the time I was in my 20s, I was working a lot with the Norse pantheon, so the kind of Viking gods. But it never, it always felt like I was a guest in someone else's home when I was working with those. And it was, I wasn't an unwelcome guest, but it wasn't mine. And by my late 20s, early 30s, I'd kind of forgotten that magic worked, which, like, looking back on it, I'm not sure exactly how that happened, but I think it had a lot to do with the fact that I was working as a programmer. That there seems to be, I've heard this from several sources, that I know people who do numerical puzzles to shut down their intuitive senses because if people who are sensitive to the energy of people around them, it can get very overwhelming. I'm not a problem I've ever had myself, but yeah, I know people who do mathematical problems or work on computers as a way of getting some headspace from other people's energy. And I was spending a lot of time working on computers, doing programming, doing software development, and yeah, something about that seems to shut down the magical side, and also related to that, I think, is the connection to your body. There seems to be a connection between magic and your physical body. I mean, people often think about things like astral projection and like leaving the heavy material stuff behind. But I've noticed that my own intuition and senses have developed more as I've got back in touch with my physical body. So yeah, whereas I'm now working in IT again, and I've noticed I have to be more disciplined about my magical practice, or I start losing it. I start losing that connection again. So there's something about that kind of intellectual work that lifts you out of your body and into your head, I guess is the best way I can put it. So anyway, yeah, you were asking about how I came to magic. So I came to magic, I left it, and then I was in the process of failing a PhD in the mid-2010s, and I was procrastinating. It wasn't going well, and I don't remember how exactly I found it, but I ended up reading a review of a law of attraction book on a website. It was called E Squared or something like that. So it was something that didn't seem to be magically related when I'd clicked the link. And that reminded me, hang on, I used to do this stuff, didn't I? What happened? And that set me back on the path. It wasn't quite that straightforward, but yeah, that started to get me back interested in magic again. And from there, it took a couple of years after that, but from there, I failed the PhD, I moved to Finland, and then chaos magic came knocking, basically. That I just had a whole bunch of synchronicities around chaos magic. And that felt like home for the first time in my kind of magical practice.
Yeah, and you mentioned about this magical practice that you do. So could you tell us, what is your magical practice?
It's varied a lot. I mean, the core kind of technologies of chaos magic are, I mean, sigil magic is the technique people associate with it. What you essentially do is you write out you write out your intention, what you want to happen, and then you mash all the letters together into a single symbol that represents that intention, but you try to avoid having anything about that symbol that makes it easy to remember what the thing it represents was. But you create a single abstract symbol representing the intention. And so I started with that. And the thing about chaos magic is I'm sure some people are going to laugh when I say that. It tries to take a scientific approach to magic. Like I call it a magical journal, but it's basically a lab book. I'm not always as diligent about this as I maybe would like to be, but the idea is, when I do a magical operation of some kind, I write down what I do, when I do it, and then I see what happens. I record the results, basically, and if it works, then do it again, and if it doesn't work, don't. And so once you've been doing chaos magic for a while, if you get a group of experienced chaos magicians in the same room and ask them what their magical practice looks like, you'll get like as many different answers as there are people. So recently, a lot of my so I've been doing some Tibetan dream yoga practices recently, which is quite far removed from like where I started with sigil magic and servitor creation and the other kind of classical chaos magic tools. And I'm not sure it's necessarily that recognizable as a magical practice anymore. So one of the things I'm doing on a daily basis is multiple times a day I'm saying to myself, this is a dream. I'm reminding myself when I'm awake that actually this world isn't as real as it seems. And I'm exploring how that changes my perception of the world and what effect that has on my relationship to my ability to cause changes in it. So I've kind of disappeared up my own arse when it comes to this a bit, because I've been getting much more interested in the metaphysics of it, that the relationship between magic and reality, than if you look back at my magical journals from 2017, like they were all about like money and sex and all the classic things people use magic to try and get. And now it's much more, there's the line between my magical practice and the rest of my life has blurred a lot. Another practice I use is a kind of Nordic folk magic technique called I can't remember the Swedish name for it, but narrative charms, where you basically fictionalize an account of what you want to happen with you as a character in them. So, for example, picking a silly example, if you wanted a lottery win, you might say the magician was delighted to win the game of chance, or something like that. That you make an abstract story that describes a character that stands in for you getting the thing that you want. And this kind of relates to something Gordon White, who's an Australian chaos magician, relates to something he is very interested in the relationship between magic and metaphor. That I believe it's an Australian Aboriginal expression that like a bad metaphor is a curse. So so yeah, the idea of how stories and magic relate to each other is fascinating, because one of the anyone who knows anything about the history of chaos magic knows about the Invisibles, which is a comic book series by oh god, I'm terrible at names. What's his name? I can see his face. A Scottish comic book artist. His name will come back to me in a minute. That's kind of embarrassing. But yeah, he created this entire comic book series as a magical act to like get more excitement into his own life. He wrote himself into it as a character. He got most of what he wrote, including the bit where he like hospitalized himself after writing this character like being badly injured. So
Dang.
so yeah, there's a relationship between story and metaphor and magic.
So would you tell us what was your first successful practice with magic?
Oh, that was a long time ago. That's a really good question. I don't know what my first was. I can remember some of my early ones. I was mid-20, like when I was in my mid-20s, I was like out of work. I'd recently quit a job because it was like making me miserable, and yeah, I did some magic to get work, and a few days later, someone like called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, I hear you used to do contract programming work. Are you interested?" And yeah, so like someone I knew had given my name to this person, my phone number to this person without them knowing, and I ended up working for them on and off for 2.5 years. And so that was one of the most notable of my early successes. I think that not even that early, but that was the one where it's like, oh, okay, that was quick and a clear victory. But like, what in terms of the, I think I had, as a teenager, I had very patchy results. That I wasn't being very disciplined about how I did magic, or what magic I did, or when I did it. And so yeah, I know there were earlier successes than that, but like I'm struggling to bring them to mind.
It's okay. Thank you for sharing. Another thing that is interesting for me is that you can use magic in a context of, well, for example, you mentioned law of attraction.
Mm-hmm, yep.
But then also voodoo, which has a lot of black magic also.
I mean, it's very much associated with that.
Yeah,
but there's
yeah,
a lot more to
yeah.
it than that. It's not my personal path, but
Yeah. Can you explain difference between white magic and black magic?
I'm not sure I can. I mean, the boundaries are not as clear as people think, because like obviously, you know, like hexing people, cursing, that's you know, people would clearly classify that as like black magic. But there's a thing called blessing up, which is basically where you maliciously bless someone. So, for example, if you wanted to, you might bless someone up to have a really harrowing spiritual experience, which would enable them to grow as a person. So is that a blessing or a curse? Because they come out of it a better person, but you're doing it because you want them to have a really bad time for the next year or so.
Yeah.
But like you're doing it with the intention of them growing as a person. And like love magic, you know, people like people don't see that as cursing, but it can be. It absolutely can be. If you're doing a love spell to make someone love you, then like you're taking away their right to refuse consent.
Yeah, exactly. It's manipulating.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and again, like I mentioned Gordon White, but one thing he says that, when you, as a magician, when you set out to do any magical act, you're deciding that you know better than God how the universe should be. And so it's like there's even acts of like quotes white magic unquotes. It's like, yeah, you're changing the course of events in the world in ways that may have far-reaching implications for the people around you. It's hard to know what, so if I do a spell to get some money and I find 20 euros on the floor, someone's lost 20 euros. Like, that could be a profoundly destructive event for them if they're
Their last 20 euros.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they may not be able to buy food now. And so that seems like a fairly innocuous, like relatively harmless thing to do. But it's, as I say, I don't see a clear distinction between white and black magic. And I mean, there's clearly stuff I don't do because like it's being a dick with magic basically, but I don't think that's necessarily the same as like good magic and evil magic.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, thanks.
And I wonder, like, who or what do the magicians answer to? Like, how does the law of karma imply here? And like you mentioned, the universe and the God, but like, do you answer to someone or something?
That's so yeah. So discuss the nature of God. In terms of I'll take that as two separate questions related to karma. Again, if you look at different traditions around the world, many of them have some kind of karma-like concept. Witchcraft has the threefold law, where you get back thrice what you put out into the world, whether that's good or bad. If you can compare like cursing in those practices with certain African practices, who carries the responsibility for the curse is different between cultures. So in some magical practices, it's the person who commissions the magician to curse who carries the quotes karma for that. And in other practices, I think in voodoo, it's the person who commissions the magician who carries the karma for the curse. But in like certain African practices, it's the magician themselves. And it seems to be a lot of these things related to kind of the ideas like karma seem to be culturally defined. And I don't know what I believe about them personally. It's not something I personally worry about too much when I do magic. So I'm not like, ooh, if I get a shiny new car, like, is there going to be some cost to that later in life? It's like, whatevs. But my kind of view on that, I try, as I said, I try not to be a dick with magic, basically, which, is like that's how I try to live. Like even beyond magic, like I try not to be a dick to people. I don't always succeed, but I'm not convinced there's a universal. I don't like the idea of universal laws. I think is it Rupert Sheldrake, the rather outspoken Cambridge biologist. His view is that the universe doesn't have laws; it has habits, and I like that perspective. If you're behaving in a way that the universe has a habit for, then you will start to see karma effects related to that kind of practice. So I'm not saying the threefold law from witchcraft is wrong. I think if you practice that kind of Godnerian witchcraft, that kind of Godnerian Wicca, then you absolutely are in a situation where the universe has a habit around how that works. And so, yeah, you will absolutely find that the threefold law is very real. If you're a voodoo practitioner, then yeah, your client who orders the curse is probably the one who's going to have the shitty look for a while afterwards. And I think that universal habits rather than universal laws seems to fit what I've read and seen about this myself. I've had magic backfire on me. I've had it go wrong. I've had it do the opposite of. I once turned a pretty reliable motorbike into like a thing that broke down basically every time I rode it with a botched spell. But I don't view that through the lens of karma. It's like, yeah, sometimes you mess up, sometimes you get things wrong, and well, I guess then the other question of like, what do I answer to? I don't know. I don't have. I know a lot of people in the wider magical community, and in the kind of online communities I'm in, and people I hang out with in my day-to-day life who have magical practices, who work with specific pagan deities or with saints or with like spirits of place, spirits of land, and who have like a particular patron spirit or god or goddess or saint that they consider themselves kind of answerable to. My own practice doesn't look like that. I tend to approach gods and spirits as like I tend to approach them respectfully as other people, rather than in a kind of hierarchical relationship. So one of the things that has never appealed to me about the medieval grimoire tradition, I know quite a few people who work with that very successfully, but most of it seems to be based around these strict hierarchies of like God at the top, then the archangels, then like a layer of spirits under that, and there's very like tree diagrams of who answers to who and who's responsible for what, and that model of the universe doesn't work well for me, I think. Certainly not at the moment, but ask me again in a few years.
So you're working with friends, kind of?
Not necessarily friends. I think it would be kind of presumptive to... It would be presumptious of me to like, like... say, oh yeah, me and Odin, we're good mates. It's like that sounds like quite a dangerous thing to to claim. But no, it's like if you want help with something and someone has the skills that you need, but they're a stranger, then like you can go and ask them for help. But you do it respectfully because they don't know who you are. It just a lot of stuff in. I think Josephine McCarthy, who's one of my magical heroes, she's another British occultist. She says that you in magic a lot of people look at magic as being a very separate thing to their life, to their like the rest of their life. And she said, no, like look at if you were going around to ask your neighbour to borrow their lawnmower, you wouldn't kick the front door in and say, "In the name of God, I demand that." Like, so why would you do that with spirits?
Yeah.
And so yeah, if you want to borrow Odin's lawnmower, then like knock on the door and ask nicely, and maybe take him a bottle of mead. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's. As I say, I'm not advocating. Yeah, I'm friends with gods. It's like no, but like you can build relationships with them respectfully as you would with other people in the kind of everyday world.
So, can anyone be a magician? Is everyone a magician of their own kind?
Maybe. There you go. I Weasley answer there.
That's a
but
solid answer.
yeah. So I think a big part of magic is learning to not learning to stop doing the magic that makes your life harder. That I think there are a lot of reasons that I think my kind of core metaphysics is that consciousness is fundamental to the universe. I think as conscious living beings, we're constantly creating the reality we live in. And due to trauma and the kind of society we've grown up in, and maybe even a curse that was laid on your great grandfather or whatever. I think a lot of people are, how to put this in a compassionate way, because a lot of people are enchanting for bad things to happen to them unknowingly, and I'm trying to be careful how I say this, because this is the law of attraction community has a lot of good magical technology in it, but some of the ideas lack compassion. The idea that if you don't have the new Audi yet, then that's because you're not manifesting hard enough, or if you have bad shit in your life, then it's your fault.
Yeah, you're so low vibrational.
Yeah.
I must say, related to this law of attraction practice, that my understanding of it, or what I've heard, is that it's not that trauma or karma conscious. So yeah, personally, that's really irritating and frustrating to hear that you can just, higher up your vibrations and you'll attract this Mercedes-Benz and, money and sex and whatever you want in your life, and, better life and better love, and like that's not really compassionate, like you said before.
But I mean, for some people, another Josephine McCarthy quote that being a skilled magician does not necessarily make you a nice person. Those are two independent axes of the graph. And so yeah, I mean, not everyone's here to make the world a better place. And that's okay. That's maybe the fancy house with the swimming pool and the Mercedes Benz is is what someone wants, and I'm completely okay with people wanting that. But
yeah, I get that, and what I gather from this conversation too is that there is a certain balance in the world, or a certain balance in the universe. Like Mira asked about black and white magic, for instance, that like it's not clear where the boundary is there.
No, and I would say I'm not, just to clarify, I'm not saying that there's no absolute right and wrong or anything like that. I'm pretty sure evil is actually a thing. But most things that are usually classified as being evil are actually not. It's a knife is a tool, and you can use it to chop vegetables, or you can use it to kill people. And there's nothing. Magic is the same. It's not fundamentally good or bad, but you can use it for. You can certainly use it either way. We're all co-creating the universe together. It's not like you're like solely responsible for all the bad stuff that's going on in the world. You know, if you find yourself in a war zone, then that's probably not your fault. I mean, fault is not a good word to use for it, but we are. I think a lot of the things we find in our personal things that we find in our day-to-day lives, that those are things that we have enchanted for, that we've attracted to ourselves. And a big part of the early stages of magic for most people is learning to stop doing that. And so, is everyone capable of magic? Yes. Can everyone do magic? No. I think, like, maybe. I don't know. I think it's very hard for some people to get out of that trap of. A lot of people are living in a loop, and that can be, even if it's not actively bad. I think, but possibly particularly if it's not actively bad. If you're, if your life is like, good enough, and you've got a stable, well-paying job, and yeah, sure, it's maybe not what you'd have imagined, the life you'd have imagined yourself living, if you could have chosen anything. But it's very easy to get stuck in that kind of rut, and I don't know if probably everyone could, in principle, break out of that kind of situation if they wanted to. But if it's comfortable enough, then many people don't want to. And so, could they be magicians? Probably. But are they going to be? Probably not. And then I know, in terms of the research that was done in places like the Esalen Institute in the US, I think they found that most people can exhibit some level of precognitive ability, but there's a small percentage of people who can't, or who don't seem able to, and I don't think that's well understood. So I wouldn't go as far as to say yes, everyone can learn magic. I mean, everyone can try, and you may surprise yourself with the results.
Yeah, now we are getting closer to the next question I have in mind about spiritual growth, personal growth. How can you use magic in that context? How can magic help you grow as a person?
A lot of people like me, get into magic because they want shiny stuff. And I think if that's all you want, if you just want the shiny toys, then things like law of attraction that's the way to go. If you go to a law of attraction convention, there are a lot of Mercedes in the car park. Like they have a lot of tech for that. I'm not, by no means am I recruiting for chaos magic here, but like if you go to a chaos magic convention, the cars parked outside are wrecks, but all the people inside have had really profound experiences on some level. They're like they've all found themselves on a spiritual path, whether they liked it or not. And so I think having a magical practice inevitably makes the world a larger place, and things tend to find you. Things tend to you. It's like switching a light on. That if there's some path you're meant to be walking, then you start doing a magical practice, and there's a knock at the door. It's like, oh, hi, yeah, and yeah, synchronicities will show up. That you'll find yourself, if you're yeah, you'll find yourself called to do healing, or you'll find yourself, either for yourself or for others, or you'll find yourself you'll find yourself in weird situations that make you grow. And so I think, again, there's not a clear line between walking a mystical path of spiritual growth and having a magical practice. That you can very easily find yourself like moving from one of those to the other. So yeah, and you can do magic for healing. You can do magic for working with ancestors and releasing ancestral trauma that you're carrying. Practices like family constellation therapy, like that's, in what way is that not doing magic?
Yeah, I know. I've experienced that.
Yeah.
It's really magical.
Yeah,
what happens there?
It's like, so does that mean that someone who facilitates that is a magician? Well, probably not. They probably don't call themselves that. But or if you're doing, if you're deliberately going along to that and having those experiences, that does, from a certain point of view, you're a magician. You're following. It's not just a spiritual growth path. You're using magical tools to do that, and so yeah, and meta magic is a very powerful thing that you can do. So magic that makes you better at magic, and that often involves healing stuff, whether it's your own or whether it's that often necessarily involves spiritual growth. That you get better at magic by removing the blocks and the blinds, by getting rid of the blocks and the blind spots that you have, which you might be working on in a different way in your path. So I don't see that there's a clear distinction between, even if you don't set out, as I say, a lot of people come to magic because they're either they're edgy teenagers who are like, yeah, I want to summon up a demon, or spend the night with my friends in a disused asylum with a Ouija board. Things that, by doing those things, you tend to open up avenues of spiritual growth that you wouldn't necessarily even have considered if you hadn't had the magical practice, even if that wasn't your intention when you set out.
So, if someone who is listening to this podcast now would be interested to get to know more about magic, would you recommend some website or book?
YouTube?
To get started?
It depends what path you're interested in, I guess. If you want a new Mercedes, like, absolutely look into Law of Attraction, or go a little bit further back, and you can some of the New Thought books from the 1920s. Lawrence Scoville Shin, I think, was one of the kind of classic New Thought writers. So if you look in, Google New Thought, Google Law of Attraction. The nice thing about some of the New Thought stuff is it's old enough that it's out of copyright, so you can very cheaply read some books on it, and I think Law of Attraction grew out of the New Thought movement. If what you want is like an uptick in your finances, then that's a really good place to start. If chaos magic is your thing, you can Google how to do sigil magic. Just Google chaos magic, and you can find 1,000 YouTube videos showing you how to do sigils, how to start doing sigil magic. And sigil magic it's popular because it's simple and it's effective. It's very easy to do, and people are often very surprised by how well their first sigil goes. Let's put it that way. yeah. What else? I mean, if you're drawn to a particular tradition or practice, or if you're um, uh, yeah, like you can, like, Google is a good place to start. Open yourself up to synchronous discoveries.
Just briefly, I know that you also do tarot readings,
Yes.
and I've received a couple of them from you too.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, thank you for them. I think you're really good at what you do.
Thank you.
So how does tarot fit in the context of magic?
It's any form of divination, fortune telling, be it with cards, be it rune stones, be it like chicken entrails. It's it's a tool for getting some visibility on possible outcomes to choices where you don't have a clear intuition about what the right path is. I mean, sometimes the idea of the right path is meaningless. That if you go this way, these things will happen and you'll grow. If you go this way, these other things will happen and you'll grow. But like, fortune telling is a good way of getting insights into what's coming. Particularly, I mean, I don't think I'm being too controversial to say we live in quite uncertain times at the moment. I think this is probably why there's been a resurgence in things like astrology and tarot, because people are looking for ways to get a slightly further horizon in terms of planning what's going on in their own lives. Because a lot of the traditional ways of, I have my retirement plan for when I'm 65, like, it's hard to say whether whether the retirement fund is going to be there anymore. So yeah, it's on one level, it's a tool for getting insights about what's coming down the timeline, and on another, it can be a useful psychological tool just for, like, exploring ideas. So I use coaching techniques in my tarot readings, and I use tarot sometimes in my coaching sessions with clients who are familiar with the symbolism, because I'm not one of those people who thinks that tarot reading is an entirely like psychological process. I think there's definitely more to it than that. In terms of, I've had some uncannily detailed readings where someone asking about her future career, and she was one of these clients who is just like, she asks her question and then just sits there silently, and so it's like, come on, work with me here. But yeah, there was one card in the reading that I'm like, I'm not sure what this is about, so I threw an extra card, and I was like, he's a psychologist. It turns out, like, actually psychology was the degree she was just finishing, and so yeah, you sometimes get like uncannily detailed readings which you wouldn't necessarily expect if you were using a purely psychological model of tarot. But they are a useful psychological tool. The symbols, if you look into things like Jungian psychology, there's a lot of archetypal imagery in tarot, which can be really good for helping people get perspective on the kind of archetypal events that are happening in their own life. So there's layers to it.
If someone of our listeners wants to come to have a tarot reading or be a coaching client, or they want to find you somewhere, what's your web page?
My web page is walkwiddershins.com. Do you have show notes? We can put that in.
Yes.
I do seem to have a talent for picking like the least memorable names for for my website. So yeah, that's one place to find me, and I'm also walk_widdershins, I think, on Instagram, which I haven't been using that much recently, but you can definitely get in contact with me there. And yeah, as I say, my website, I'll give you the link and you can put it in the show notes.
Beautiful. I would say this this session has been quite magical.
Yeah, as you said in the beginning before we started recording, you said that because I was telling you that I don't know a lot of magic, and you said that, well, probably you do, but you just use different words. And now exactly it's how I feel right now, because I feel like I am dealing with magic every day, actually.
Yeah.
But I just use different words.
Yes.
So thank you. This is really enlightening.
Great. Well, I hope it's been helpful to you or some of your listeners.
Yes, thank you. Do you have any words that you would like to say now at the end?
Do what feels fun. Like don't do any of this from a sense of obligation. If you're called to do it, if it feels like it would be a fun way to spend your time, then yeah, play around with the magical practice and see what happens. Maybe skip the Ouija board in the disused asylum.
I think that's a good way to put it. Thank you, Glyn.
Thank you, Glyn.
Thank you.
It was really nice to have you.
Really
It was
nice
a
to be here.
pleasure.